All right, you guys, it's 1 o'clock. Brian, if you could just put everyone on mute. It's 1 p.m. on the East Coast. And as always, we'll go ahead and start our call on time. Everyone's now on mute, but when the time comes for questions or comments, I'll tell you how to request unmuting so we can unmute you. My name's Azer Cole, one of the 2 Citizen Empowerment Coordinators here at American Promise. And welcome to the American Promise Citizen Uprising National Call for October, a call that happens on the second Saturday of each month. Thanks to all of you who've taken the time out of your busy weekends to join us today, or maybe you couldn't make it and are listening to this recording afterwards. Either way, you're stepping up to save our democracy, and a big thank you to all of you. We're honored to have an incredible guest speaker here with us today. Mr. John Pudner, Director of Take Back Our Republic, is here with us. And after we hear from Mr. Pudner, we'll hear a grassroots victory, then discuss writing letters to the editor and how to create champions in the media surrounding a 28th Amendment to the Constitution to get money out of politics. We'll ask folks to actually do a little online research, so if you're able to be in front of a computer for later on in the call, please do so. And we've just been so inspired to see folks stepping up all across the country to start new American Promise Associations, or APAs as we like to call them. And since the call last month, a phenomenal group of citizen leaders have come together in Tulsa, Oklahoma to launch the newest APA, and we're in the process of launching groups in Port Clinton, Ohio, Narberth, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Missouri, Nashville, Tennessee, Brunswick, Maine, and Wilmington, Delaware. And I expect to be able to announce even more in the coming weeks. So thanks to all of you guys for stepping up. And if you're interested in starting a new APA, feel free to send me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. That's AZORC@americanpromise.net. And I wanted to start this call by sharing this quote from Thurgood Marshall, who said, "When you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on." Let me quickly repeat that. When you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on. And I think we're all on this call because we see the wrongs, inequalities, and injustices money's political influence afflicts our country with, and we use these calls in our monthly actions to start righting these wrongs by going straight to the root, getting money out of politics. And that's why I've been so inspired about all the new APAs starting up and engaging in their communities, not only speaking up against inequality and injustice, but acting against it too, to pass the 28th Amendment to ensure that people, not money, not special interests, not corporations, govern. And this is the type of action that will really cause the big breakthroughs in the 28th Amendment movement, and it's happening all across the country. So thanks to everyone on the call who's already started an APA or is currently in the process of starting one. I'm now going to kick it over to Jeff Clements, founder and president of American Promise, to say hello and introduce the fantastic guest speaker we have with us today. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Azer. Thanks so much. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And big thanks to John Pudner. So good to have you here with us, John. Many of you on the call might remember John was at our first National Citizen Leadership Conference back in last year. We're having our next one coming up in June 2018, this coming June. So we're looking forward to seeing John back there and seeing all of you as well. Let me give a quick introduction to John, and then he will take it from here. Those of you who have been following John's work may recall most famously in 2014 when he stunned the political establishment by leading the campaign of Dave Bratt, an outsider with limited money who unseated in a Republican primary the majority leader of the House, Eric Cantor, in a Virginia election. That's the kind of campaigns John is famous for, outsmarting the opponents rather than outspending them. He's originally comes from Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, the oldest of 9 children, grew up there, now lives in Alabama. And like his campaign with Dave Bratt, he has worked in politics from a conservative perspective, but that doesn't mean a big money, big corporate perspective, as his campaign with Dave Brat shows. So John, following that campaign, was moved over to run Take Back Our Republic. You can check them out at takeback.org. And it's a conservative and a Republican and national, really for everybody, like American Promise is, but comes at it with conservative solutions, including the 28th Amendment. And John penned a outstanding op-ed outlining his thinking about why the work we do for a constitutional amendment together is so important. John joined our advisory council and has done so much all over the country for our work together as Americans to reform our politics. He's also quite the sports statistician, so I would not bet on any sports team without checking with John, and unfortunately he's a Houston Astros fan and beat my beloved Boston Red Sox. But now that they're playing the Yankees, we're rooting for you and them, John. So thank you so much for joining us. Let me turn it over to you, but just before I do, let me tell you who's some of the people who are on our call today to just give you a sense of that. We have Vicki Barnes, who leads our APA with many others in St. Paul, Minnesota, who recently met with her Republican member of Congress, Eric Paulson, and Penny Watson, a member of our South Jersey APA, whose group met with their Republican member of Congress, Frank Lobiondo, recently as well. This is happening around the country. People like Vicki and Penny are the kind of people you're talking to, and I know they and all of us are so eager to learn from you about how we can bring more Republicans on board this great national historic campaign. So with that, John, let me turn it over to you, and we'll have Q&A afterwards moderated by Azer. So as John's is speaking, just feel free to be thinking about any questions, jot them down, and then Azer will tell you how to pose those questions as you press 1 on your keypad. But John, take it away. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. And Jeff, thank you for all the updates on the new APAs as well. I came out of a grassroots world, and one reason we've been so excited about the alliance with American Promise is just seeing that you have real local grassroots around the country. And, that's the first thing you need for big change. When you get into something like a constitutional amendment and you look at history, it has taken frustration around the country, but not just frustration, the constructive ability to organize, I'll say chapters now, but movements, and it's just great to hear that. And that is my background. While my background was conservative politics prior to switching over to this a few years ago, as Jeff said, it wasn't corporate. It was how do we organize real people concerned about real issues. And even though mine were more drawn from some conservative sources and possibly motivating issues, for example, I managed to round up 14 million names through a pure grassroots effort in Bush 2000 to turn out. This was kind of faith-based voters and going out. And one thing you have to learn very quickly in a grassroots effort is, are these issues real? Are they motivating? And, and who's kind of just talking and who's really doing things. So I just can't tell you how great it is to hear of new APA chapters starting. Again, sounds like several more. And we've just loved the big joint event we did in New England right after I wrote the first piece, and we came out for the 28th Amendment after spending some time with Jeff, after spending a few months to really walk through what objections some of our members had, but overall it was a very unifying position to take in the end. And certainly we're looking forward to, I know we have an event in Michigan and some other joint events. We tried to do one in San Francisco, and unfortunately the Bay traffic kept me from getting from one event over to the other, but we certainly look forward to many times being out there in the field. So thank you. I think you all are great allies. And we're happy to be an ally of yours on this fight. I wanted to today, I have gone to the media several times to make the case on various campaign finance reform. As Jeff mentioned, the Daily Caller piece was where we really think we laid out the case for why conservatives should also join this fight. This isn't a system that helps anyone. And this kind of free speech argument on the other side, which is mainly being made by billionaires to protect their speech, just to really walk through how that kills off the speech of average people, and to understand that what the founders wanted was a balanced system. They certainly, if someone has a bunch of money, and they certainly have a First Amendment right to speak, but it can't become such an overwhelming system where that obliterates everyone else's ability to speak and affect policy. And because at that point, you really do just get to an oligarchy. I mean, you can call it a democracy or a republic, but if only a few voices are being heard, special interests, billionaires, corporate unions, I'd put in many aspects, then you don't really have the system you want. And so I'm going to have another piece coming out in Newsmax shortly, and kind of work toward why the 28th is the amendment is the best solution to the post-Citizens United era that we've been in now this decade. And I'll quickly, just kind of going back to the Thomas Aquinas approach, I just want to touch on the other arguments quickly and say why I don't think they work. This is from being married to a ethics professor my whole life who often quotes Aquinas and Aristotle and others. But I do, let's really seriously look at the other arguments very quickly. I mean, I'd say there are four arguments, the fourth being we need a 28th Amendment. The first is just kind of the Wild West argument that there shouldn't be any rules. Some libertarians think this is the best effort. Just let everyone spend whatever they want. People will sort it out. And they've tried to make the argument that this is the libertarian argument because we don't want as many laws in theory. And I'd argue, even for libertarians, I just argued this in Texas at a panel with some conservative TV people who actually really bought into the argument. Even from a libertarian perspective, the idea is you don't interfere with free enterprise. I mean, we won't debate that here, but that's the argument. And if that's your argument, it can't be that there are no rules on campaign contributions, because you end up with a pay-for-play system where the government is actually picking winners and losers and picking which businesses do well and favoring one over the other. And so I really think there's a tendency to go, oh, well, libertarian group, they won't be with us. No, I think they can be. I think even those groups, we've been able, when we really make this argument that, no, this is a distortion even on the economic system to not allow any serious rules on campaign finance reform. So that's how I think we need to get through just sort of the Wild West. Let's go to South Dakota system where you can give as many contributions and gifts and not disclose any of them, and this is going to create a better system. So I know I'm preaching the choir to that, but I just think I just want to encourage you to even engage libertarians who might seem the toughest sell. I think secondly, there's an argument that, well, we want campaign finance reform, but let's just do it within the confines of Citizens United. And we did want to, our first year and a half as a group, look at those possibilities. So it did take us a while to publicly come out the 28th. And let's keep in mind there are some other things that can be done. I mean, you can have transparency even within Citizens United, et cetera. But what I think we don't want to do is let people use that as an argument against Citizens United, or against changing Citizens United, because we are just trimming around the hedges. I mean, there are substantial things that we can't do if Citizens United is in place. So, but I would say to all of you on who are fighting for a 28th Amendment, I'd say don't let it be mutually exclusive, though. There still may be other things just even separate from American Promise efforts, or maybe they tie in, but where there's a chance in a state to have some positive law even within that framework. So the old don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Keep fighting for the 28th, but let's acknowledge there are some things that still can be done, including transparency. Third, I'll touch on, just because it becomes the hot one anytime we talk about, so what about an Article 5 convention as an alternative to an amendment? And boy, that's I get a lot of reaction whenever I go into that. I will say we as a group say we're in favor of an Article 5 convention if it were to happen, but the 28th Amendment is a better solution. I think Article 5 could fix this. People are outraged enough. I do think the critics are right to say it would be hard to keep an Article 5 convention just to one topic. I don't think you really can, and that's the fear people have. Well, are you rewriting other parts of the convention, of the Constitution, even if you call it specifically to address Citizens United campaign finance reform? So that's the problem with Article 5. I will say you need 38 of 50 states to pass anything, so I don't think you'd have lots of things running through, but just just for the record, we're in favor of Article 5, but say that the 28th Amendment is the better solution, which brings us to the 28th. So all these other three are kind of the alternative views. What you want is an amendment that can say specifically what you want to say, keep it on topic. And I think the biggest hurdle we have to overcome is the same hurdle I'd tell every candidate when they first decided to run, with Dave Bratt being the one that last year was running campaigns. And that is, the hardest battle is not winning the argument. The hardest battle is credibility. The big focus is you have to convince people an amendment to the Constitution can pass. And I think Jeff has laid out some great things. I think others have. But I think to frame it in history, that when you get to these points where people are frustrated, they just see the system not working, they no longer believe their government's representing them, those are the times that amendments have passed, and they've passed in little clusters historically. And so I would just tell everyone, put as much effort into kind of working out in your own words, here is why an amendment can pass. Here is why people are so upset in this system that it can happen, because that's the biggest hurdle. I find that once I give a few historical context and people believe, oh, okay, so the 28th actually could happen, it's a pretty easy sell, actually, that it should happen. It's just a question. Our biggest obstacle to overcome with people is always, well, wait, why are you wasting your time on that? Amendments pass so infrequently. And just to say, this is clearly a point in our history where the populace is in a spot where this can happen. So put as much effort into that as I think to the winning arguments for why we the 28th. And that's what we try to put out through our state chapters. I hope we can match up our state chapters with any APAs out there, and, particularly in red states where we, sometimes we're more helpful in a state like South Dakota, or we're going to North Dakota this year, and different areas. But we are happy to help wherever we can be helpful. And with that, I'll certainly open it up, Jeff, for any questions or anything else you want to follow up with.
That's great. Thanks, John. Let me turn it back to Azer to moderate the questions.
Great. Yeah, thanks again, John. And let's open it up for some questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and press 1 on your keypad, and my colleague Brian will let me know who to call on. All right, Brian, has anyone raised their hand to ask a question?
Yeah, let's go with Craig Clevenon. Craig, you should be unmuted now.
Yes. Hi, John. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Hey, Craig.
Thanks for dialing in.
Hello, John. I'd like to ask you, with your experience in politics, what's your thoughts on the political ramifications of using public financing as our mechanism for the structure for our campaign finance reform for the 28th Amendment?
Sure. I will say in our groups, public financing is a tough sell, in conservative circles. The step we've taken, which became the focus of the most recent Fox News piece, just because the host came in and said it was the topic you want to talk about. We have talked about tax credits. Now I know some groups on the left don't feel that goes long enough, but we found that we can make the argument with our groups that, look, while this government's kind of run wild and no one's happy with it across the spectrum, shouldn't you be able to keep the first couple $100 you're going to give the IRS and instead choose candidates? And that's, to some degree, a step toward public financing. I mean, the pushback from leadership on the Hill, for example, is, well, we've got to score that. We've got to see how much it costs us. Our argument is you would save so much money if we actually had alternate funding for campaigns. So I realize that's not going to go far enough for most left of center groups who would say, no, we want outright public financing, or we want a refundable tax credit. We want everyone to be able to give. And I will say we have backed voucher systems in South Dakota last year. However, it was easier for us to do that because there was no state income tax in South Dakota, and we were able to say this is the best option, given that you can't do a tax credit in a state with no income tax. So this probably isn't a very satisfactory answer to you, but I just want to be upfront and say that is a tough one for us to win conservatives over to, and I think leading with public financing is probably tough in some, in any kind of red-leaning state would be a tougher sell. But, I'd certainly keep looking at wording and see what works for you. But you've asked a good one, but unfortunately it's a tough question. I don't have a great final scenario on.
All right. Well, thanks for the question, Craig. And, it looks like a couple people have their hands up. Brian, if you'll just let me know who to call on. And, if you're called on, please say your name and where you're calling in from as well.
Okay, let's go with Daniel Gare. Daniel,
hi. Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm calling in from Washington. My question is, you briefly mentioned the Article 5, and I wanted to know, can you tell me a little bit about why you support it, and why you think that you don't want to put your own or the American promises, our efforts towards going forward with Article 5, but you do support it in some way?
Yeah, I have found it's the quickest way I can ignite a debate within one of our meetings. It's a hot issue. I do, in general, I think we need Citizens United changed, and I like any alternative to do that. I do think Article 5 is one way you could do that. I think people are so outraged on money and politics right now. And, and there's a path that Article 5 could happen. I mean, theoretically, one of the efforts is 6 states away. So we think, one, that putting pressure for an Article 5, I believe in the past, has tended to push amendments along. So I think talking about it, one, can be a means to an end in certain places. Secondly, it actually could do it. And while I do recognize the objections to some pro-28th Amendment groups who just say, hey, this thing could run away and talk, and 18 other things we've done to the Constitution, I think the trick for me is if you got an Article 5 convention and we're deciding this all in a room with admittedly crazy rules, you do need 38 states for anything that passes. And I do think undoing Citizens United would be one of the few things you could really get 38 states on. Basically anyone can block anything with 13 states. So I actually do think it would be a way to undo Citizens United and allow some real reform here. Again, the 28th is just cleaner. Other things can happen in that room, and just for everyone to get a feel, if Article 5 were passed, there'd probably be lawsuits for a few years. I mean, you would have every state sending a delegation. Every state would have one vote. So small states would love that. California wouldn't. I mean, California's vote would count the same as Delaware. So as you can imagine, it's a bit messy. You pass the 28th Amendment and you know what you're passing. You know exactly what you're getting through. So as much as I'd like to change Citizens United, I do think focusing on the cleaner effort, even though I know we don't have the exact wording in the 28th, but we know basically what we're trying to do. And, there are a couple of different alternates on. There's a Fix It America one that also touched on redistricting. There are other wording, but you know what you're getting with the 28th. You would be holding your breath during an Article 5 convention.
Great. Thanks for that, John. Brian, it looks like one of our APA leaders has a hand up. I'm hoping we can call on Joan DeVore.
Me?
Joan, you are now unmuted.
Okay, thank you. This is Joan from the APA in Tri-County, South Jersey. I'm going to state a question that was stated by one of our members at one of the calls with you, Azor, and that is, or maybe it was Ben. I see, political legislators and representatives saying, okay, if this amendment was passed, well, how am I going to have a budget to campaign? In other words, the implication being that passing Amendment 28 would really be a transformation of how elections are run or have been run for the last several years. And how do we give them a vision? How do we give people who ask that question, well, then what am I going to do for running for elective office? How am I going to do that? How do we give them a vision for what it will be like after that happens that they can feel comfortable with?
That's a great question. And I think the breakthrough that I've seen with some is they don't really like being in the system. I would focus them on, do you like sitting there and asking people for money all day, which is what a lot of them have to do. Is that why you ran for office? And in most cases, the answer is going to be no. I came because I thought I had better solutions on a transportation issue or education or taxes or whatever. Or, I like going out in the community and getting input from people and trying to work through solutions. And I thought I'd be talking to constituents all the time. And in most cases, what they're being made to do by their respective leadership caucus is call people all day asking for money. And that was kind of the first breakthrough we had in the Hill with some Republicans. We certainly had plenty of Democrats who were on board initially on some basic concepts. But we said, hey, do you really like this system where you call, where an intern walks over and takes you over to the headquarters? I mean, Democrats and Republicans do this. The members have to spend hours most days going over and intern escorting them and sitting them down and making them a telemarketer and saying, call all these people and ask them for money. And, that's not why most people ran for office. And so you're right. The initial thing is, well, wait, I've won a race using a system, and now you're talking about changing the system. There's always some resistance to that. But then to really, if you can get them past that initial hurdle to think, gosh, what would it be like? Oh, yeah, when I ran, I really was thinking I'd be going to fairs or knocking on doors or maybe I'm a policy wonk and I thought I'd really be sitting here going through and solving issues. And what if you could take off this demand that, most of your time be spent doing nothing but raising money? Wouldn't that be a better world for you? And when we first said that, we even floated, hey, what if we'd even be open to upping the federal $2,700 limit if it were part of an overall reform that made super PACs and dark money sources play by the same rules, where everyone had to disclose and if you could give $5,000 to candidate, even $10,000, but that's all you could give to a dark source, and they had to reveal their donors. That would be a much happier world for members of Congress. I mean, they wouldn't be raising $2,700 at a time to try to offset the threat of some super PAC coming in anonymously and dumping millions of dollars on them, and they're trying to make up the difference or go begging to leadership of their respective party, please come in and bail me out, I'm getting attacked. So it actually is a much better world for them, but I understand exactly what you're saying. The first thing they're thinking is, how do I fund, how do I overcome this? But try to get them to think about who they're overcoming, who has money, and who might go after them for what they consider a bad vote that has money, and that's what we want to get rid of as well.
Hey, John, this is Jeff. Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
There's been a couple of examples of a lot of money can come into races from a whole bunch of small donations. And, I think sometimes people think of the most famous being Bernie Sanders, who raised millions of dollars, as he said, and repeatedly an average of $27 a donation. Have you seen that on the conservative side? And I know you were wildly outspent in the Eric Cantor race with your candidate Dave Brandt. Is there a reassuring word about funding campaigns through lots of small donations once people feel like the system isn't rigged and people feel like it's not your $27 isn't wasted by the $90 million spend by a billionaire? That you'd get a lot more people actually willing to pitch in a little bit of money. And can that add up and be part of the alternative new funding system?
Yes, definitely. I think that's a great question. And it was a foregone conclusion in Republican circles until about a year ago that small dollars would always favor Democrats overwhelmingly. And we've discussed with some conservatives that is not necessarily the case, first of all. So just to hit the partisan issue up front, if you need to overcome this with a Republican official, Michael Malbin, who runs Institute, I'm forgetting the name, out of New York, he did a pretty incredible study in which he showed that if you just want to look at small dollar donors to presidentials, and define that as people who never gave over $200. So some people count, well, one person gives $200 50 times. No, this is never gave over 200. Donald Trump raised more money than Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama combined, if you only go for those under 200. Now, that make some people say, oh, no, I don't want another Trump. But the point being, conservatives, grassroots were fed up with what they considered the establishment. And there's tremendous, when you get that many donations, you see the incredible activity you get behind it, which certainly Bernie saw as well. And we had a lot of our campaigns. And with Dave Bratt, we in early March had raised $18,000, but we had 200 people actually knocking on doors. They had $5 million. So it does have to go hand in hand with kind of grassroots and with a little savvy. I mean, you need to use technology and understand how you really do digital outreach inexpensively. It can't just be a friend who likes to advertise on Facebook but doesn't really have any political background. So there are ways to do it, but because that is a more complicated answer is required to that, we're actually putting together a people-powered playbook, which I'm not sure the day we'll release it, but that's going to be open source that anyone can use. And the purpose of that is to show you how you can run a winning campaign without become addicted to big money. Just for IRS purposes, we can't put it out piecemeal. I mean, the day we release it, we have to release it to the whole world because we can't be trying to help a friend or a candidate or one party or the other. But that's going to hopefully remove the need for a political consultant who comes in and tells every candidate, okay, first thing you need to do is spend all your time raising money and use all that money on polling and TV, which has no interactive qualities, and say, no, there are ways to run an interactive campaign with your constituents inexpensively that encourages small donors, but the offshoot is you also get a lot of volunteer work out of people who write $10 and $20 and $30 checks. So, yeah.
Fantastic. John, if it's all right with you, I think we have time for one more question. And Brian, I'm hoping we can call on Vicki, who's had her hand up for quite some time now.
Yep, just 1 second. Vicki, you are unmuted.
Hey, Vicki, you there? All right, maybe let's go to Marie Henselder-Kimmel.
Marie, you're unmuted.
Hi, this is Marie Henselder-Kimmel. I'm also from the Tri-County APA in Camden County outside of Philadelphia, but in New Jersey. And I had a question. I had the opportunity to do a presentation at League of Women Voters locally here with CM Daly Harris a few weeks ago, and I was talking with him, and he said there was discussion about coming up with a House resolution for an amendment that Republican congressmen may be able to get behind, so that it would, for now, kind of shield them from that criticism, that they were on board with the Democrats. And I was wondering if you had any comments about that, John, or knew anything more about wording that might be helpful in such a House resolution.
I will certainly look into that. I don't know. We unfortunately are pretty limited in the amount of lobbying we can do because it's a 501c3, not to get technical on the phone. We do have the H filing for any lawyers on the phone. We can lobby a certain amount, but I can't be on the Hill a lot. Let me just summarize it that way. So that is something for me to check. As a matter of fact, good time to mention probably that I certainly look forward to being at the American Promise event in June, I believe, and hitting the Hill with any of you who make that. I know we've got some time to plan that. But I will check into that. We have one bill, H.R. 1341 on the Hill that we think would stop some foreign money. And we were able to get a bunch of conservative members, starting with some Freedom Caucus guys, to sign that bill. And we're saying that was the first campaign finance reform any of them had signed, certainly in the last several years. And so that was, we thought that was a good breakthrough. That's on something specific, but it was a campaign finance bill. And then actually we got a Senate version, Senate Bill 1660, which Roy Blunt signed on to, but we also had Senators Feinstein and Warner, and I'm sorry for your Minnesota people, I always mispronounce Klubacher, is actually the lead sponsors. That was a neat one because we literally had 50-some conservatives sign a House version. So this isn't exactly what it sounds like you're talking about, but at least I want to say we've made a point of getting a bill in that's campaign finance reform, just tackles a little piece of the problem, and gotten a bunch of Republicans to sign on to that. And we certainly want to compare notes. I'll look into the one you're talking about, and we'll compare notes with any other groups and certainly try to cross-pollinate there and get some ones who signed our bills on anything else to just get them over that mental hurdle of I'm backing a campaign finance reform bill.
Hey, thanks, John. It's Jeff again. If I could just add a footnote on all that, Marie, we also, as you may know, are running about an 18-month project. We're about 3 months in, called Writing the 28th Amendment, and John has been good enough to join that working group with many others, including citizen leaders and judges and members of Congress and different organizations and so on. And what we're trying to do is dig down. Not only comparing different language of existing bills, but really looking at what are the principles we're trying to achieve, what constitutional principles. And we're hopeful that as we outline that and carry this project forward, we'll be able to work with John and others in bringing some Republicans first on board to the principles they'd like to see achieved with the 28th Amendment, and then have them at the table to say what kind of language would effectively implement those principles. So that's going on now. You can see more under the Who We Are tab at AmericanPromise.net, and just scroll down to a sub-tab which is called the 28th and navigate your way through there. And all of this is available, and recordings of the calls are available and so on to check that out. And we'll be, as John mentioned, developing that even further at the conference in June. So thanks, John. And let me give it back to Azer. If are there other questions, or are we running out of time on the questions?
Yeah, I think we're out of time for questions. Just a special thanks again to you, John, for joining us today and really for your invaluable leadership in this historic effort to pass the 28th Amendment. Just a huge thank you for being here.
Thank you, and I will still be listening. I have some kids being dropped off, so I'll be on mute the rest of the call, but I'll certainly listen to the rest, and thank you for including me.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate it. Take care now.
Sure.
Great. So as I'm sure all you'll agree, this conversation with John's really important to our work. We emphasize over and over that we won't ever get a 28th Amendment with Democrats only, which is why we stress getting meetings with Republican members of Congress to bring them on board. Remember, when you've had a meeting with your member of Congress, it's not one and done. Our goal is to build relationships with these congressional members, and that comes over time and over multiple meetings. So we should have opportunities to use what we've learned from John over and over, not just once. And now before we get to our grassroots victory, I just want to start with actions that APAs have recently taken. Last month, APA members had 4 meetings with members of Congress or their staff, for a total of 16 so far this year, and had 7 letters to the editors published last month, for a total of 20 so far this year. And we want to make sure we know about your meetings with members of Congress and your letters to the editors published, so we can include them in our total next month. So if you think you've had a letter to the editor published or a congressional meeting that we might not know about, just go ahead and send me an email at azerc@americanpromise.net. And I'm now thrilled to turn it over to Dan Coy, our fantastic APA leader in Naperville, Illinois. His group's been in serious action since they started a couple months ago, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dan to tell you all a little bit about what they're doing. Hey, Dan, how you doing?
Hi, Azer. Thanks for the quite kind introduction there, and hello, everybody. I'm a chemical engineer by training and a citizen leader by necessity. As with many others here on this call on November 8th, 2016, that was a wake-up call for me. I have not served in the armed forces nor done anything else particularly heroic for my country to date, but I feel that I'm called now to do everything that I can to help get our democracy back on the right course, and that's why I'm involved in this effort. At first, I was shell-shocked on November 9th and just did what I could, including going to a lot of marches, and I still do. But as an engineer, I knew there had to be at least one root cause that needs to be addressed if we're going to make any permanent fixes here. I soon landed on Citizens United Supreme Court decision, and the resulting unlimited dark money in politics is one of the major root causes for our problems. In other words, while our system has had problems before, it has become perilously more broken under the Citizens United decision, in my opinion. I chose to work with American Promise because they are focused exclusively on this issue. They offer grassroots training, and they have a strong commitment to bipartisanship, something that's going to be absolutely necessary to build the level of support needed to secure a 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United and get unlimited dark money out of our politics. When we started, Joyce Sanchez was still here, and Joyce and Azer helped us set up our small team and set up our launch meeting with about 40 people. Out of that, we had about a dozen people form a core team. These people believe that Citizens United decision is the root cause of our problems that we see now, or at least a major root cause, and are dedicated to doing something about it. They just, like me, can't sit around anymore. We started with writing letters to the editor and asked for meetings with representatives to indicate our concerns and to get advice on how to be more effective in our efforts. One letter was published, and we've met with U.S. Representative Bill Foster, Senator staff for Richard Durbin, and staff of the Illinois gubernatorial candidate J.B. Pritzker, the Democrat. We're also working on meetings with a number of other elected officials. We've shared our learnings with American Promise Leader during the American Promise Leader calls. While those calls have just started recently, I find those calls to be a great way to share best practices. So finally, we have prepared a presentation. Our group has prepared a presentation for bipartisan audiences designed to enable others to have an informed discussion about the impact of Citizens United decision on our representative democracy and the need for a 28th Amendment to overturn it. At the end of the presentation, we give people information needed to ask or thank their representative for supporting the Democracy for All Amendment. We also ask them to write a letter to the editor if they're passionate about the issue, and give them other ways to become involved, including joining American Promise. The presentation is available for anyone to use, view, or use, and it's at the American Promise-Naperville Facebook page. So Azer, again, thanks for the opportunity to speak up and say how passionate we are about this.
Yeah, my pleasure, Dan. And really, it's a thank you for sharing, and thanks for all the phenomenal work that you and your group are doing and have been doing. Your APA was the first I ever got to work with, and I've been consistently inspired and impressed by the work you guys have done engaging elected officials, the media, and now the general public on this issue. Your commitment to the needed cross-partisan approach, as well as your enthusiasm for sharing insights and lessons with other APAs. This is the collaboration, and this is what this national community is really all about. So now I'm psyched to bring on another new voice, Boy Gatheru. She's been here at American Promise for a little over a month and has just been killing it. So, Boy, what's up?
Thanks, Azer. Hello, everybody. And I've been so incredibly inspired by the American Promise volunteers that I have spoken to. We have two goals in this section of this month's action. The first is to have everyone send a well-written letter to the editor. And the second goal is to encourage each APA to have a letter to the editor point person. So that's somebody who will check the newspaper regularly looking for articles or editorials that would be a good angle for overturning Citizens United. Then they would send that article to the group or to the letter to the editor writers in the APA. But before I begin, I would love to hear from a person or two who had a letter to the editor published this year for the first time. So what kinds of tips would you recommend, or what do you think about when you get ready to write a letter to the editor? So if somebody can tell us something about your experience writing a letter to the editor, please press the number 1 on your keypad, and when Brian calls on you, just shout out your name and your city. Okay, Go on ahead.
Okay, let's see. Marie again? Marie, you're unmuted again?
Hi. I had a letter to the editor published about 2 weeks ago. Actually, we had a 2 or 3 within a few days. But the one that I had published, we have a Congressman Tom MacArthur in the 3 congressional districts that we cover, and a Democratic nominee, a Democratic candidate that is going to be running against Tom MacArthur by the name of Andy Kim has committed to not take corporate PAC money. And I saw that announcement, and I also had gotten an email separately from the group and Citizens United PAC, and saying that they were giving him an endorsement. So I used that opportunity to send a letter to the editor applauding Andy Kim's commitment not to use corporate PAC money, and getting the Citizens United endorsement, and then use that as an opportunity to say that I was a co-leader in the recently founded Tri-County APA group, what American Promise's goal has been and why, and gave the American Promise website and information about how to reach me for anybody who was interested in joining our efforts. So, I thought it was an opportunity to congratulate him and to get some word out on our efforts, and also support for our local APA's efforts.
That is literally perfect. Those are the exact steps that everybody should be taking when they are writing a letter to the editor. So thank you so much. All right. Just so you know, I'm going to refer to letter to the editor as LTE from here on out. It's just a bit of a mouthful. So let's go over some of the steps that we just touched upon a little bit. So step 1 is to embrace the fact that the vision we share, a 28th Amendment overturning Citizens United, is a vision that can be circulated widely throughout your community, and that you are just the right person to do it. And one way that we're going to circulate our vision is through these LTEs. The second step is to go online and find out what is required to submit an LTE to whatever newspaper that you're submitting to. And all newspapers have requirements for submission, such as how many words are allowed, what email address to submit the letter to, or maybe you can just submit the letter right on the website. And they might also require your full mailing address along with a daytime phone number at the end of your letter. Usually you can just Google search the name of your paper and the phrase letters to the editor submission criteria to get the specifics for what you need. So earlier in the call, Azer had said we're going to do a little computer research. This is when we're going to do it. So go ahead and Google the name of one of your local newspapers and the phrase letters to the editor submission criteria. And I'll call on someone to share the criteria that you found in just a second. But while you're looking that up, I would love to tell you about my experience submitting a letter to the editor to my local newspaper, the Boston Globe. And here's the criteria that it requires. Letters should be written exclusively to the Globe and include name, address, and daytime phone number. They should be 200 words or fewer, and all are subject to editing. And then it lists an email, a fax number, and then a regular P.O. box office that you can send it to. So has anybody gone online and found the LTE criteria for your newspaper? If so, please press the number 1, and when Brian calls on you, shout out your name and your city like we've been doing. So who wants to let us know what goes on in your newspaper?
Walter Miller, you're now unmuted.
Yes, my name is Walter Miller. I live in Augusta, Georgia. And this is a little bit out of context of what y'all are talking about right now. But I'm not a member of the ACA yet. Right now I'm really interested in what's going on. But I have a couple of questions for you. I'm a disabled veteran. And I hear you talking about all this dark money and everything and the way this goes in political perspective. But what I see happening in America is we have these separate parties, the Democratic Party, the Libertarian Party, the Republican Party, and all this kind of stuff. And it seems to me what's happening is the dark money isn't necessarily just from corporations and all this kind of stuff. It seems these parties are this big money from these parties that they raise from all over the United States. They pack all this money into local elections for people that are voting in their local elections and everything. You know, they could care less what goes on in our cities and towns and everything around the nation. You know, they just want their voices heard, and they're overpowering everybody in the United States for this. It doesn't matter where you live. You know, they'll take the money from Michigan or California or wherever they get it from, and they take all these millions of dollars, and that's the parties that are doing this. These are local elections for local people. You know, our communities. Why are the political parties, the Republicans, Democrats, and all this, allowed to take all this money from other states and other places around and pour all this money into our local elections? That's what's harming us, I feel.
Yeah, if I could jump in, because I think you bring up a really great point as to, why this is such a big problem. And, what we're doing on this call is really bringing people together to mobilize, to push back against exactly what you described. So thanks for being on the call. Thanks for sharing. I'm just going to kick it back to a boy, just because I really want to get through this letter to the editor training and, sort of stay focused. But, thanks so much for bringing that up. I think a lot of people are having the same exact thoughts. So, well, boy, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Awesome. So the next step is to go online and read a few headlines from the front page and from the newspaper's editorials. Try to look for articles or opinion pieces that might provide a good angle for your letter. And when I was writing my own letter to the editor to the Globe, I found this article entitled, "Democrats Launch Fresh Push for Gun Control." And this was in response to the horrific shooting in Las Vegas. And what that article didn't mention that I touched upon in my LTE is the relationship between funding from the wealthy gun lobby and how a member of Congress votes. So my own LTE was entitled, "Why Gun Control Won't Happen Without a 28th Amendment." Great. And then the next step is to go ahead and read some of the LTEs in the paper that you're writing to, so you can understand how readers begin them and their general tone. After you read them, make sure you use the format from your paper that it requests when you send your LTE. And if they reject your letter, which has happened to me a couple times, try a smaller local paper. You might find that you have to use a different article to reference, or maybe you're able to write a smaller paper without referencing an article at all, but definitely still try. And if your article is published, congratulations! Celebrate. Do a little dance, pat yourself on the back for me, because that is really awesome. And after you've celebrated, be sure to share that victory with the American Promise staff on social media and with your elected officials. And if it's not published, still celebrate that you took action. Eventually, you will have a letter published, but only if you continue to take action. And on our next call, we'll see if anyone has had a letter published that you wrote today or in the next few days, and we'll celebrate that victory. We'll also encourage those who were rejected to try a smaller paper and encourage those who didn't send a letter to do so. Also remember, we just had an amazing opportunity to speak with John Pudner on these issues, and I would really encourage you to use the great information that John delivered today in your writing to make sure that we're really creating champions in all walks of life in the media around this important issue. And it's totally okay if you don't remember all of these steps. I know it's been a lot, but we will be sharing these steps with you in our follow-up email on Monday, and it's also attached in the action sheet. So thank you so much, everybody, for having me. This is my first national call, so it's really exciting, and I'm so happy to be doing this group work with all of you. Thank you, Azer.
Yep, thanks, Waboy. And just going back to, that nice gentleman, I don't know your name offhand, who just called in, who, I had to sort of interject, but, feel free to give me an email at azerc@americanpromise.net, because I think, the passion and eloquence which you were able to speak to this problem could actually make for a really strong letter to the editor, and I'd be happy to work with you in terms of turning that into something published in your local media. So, I think we might have time for one more question. If someone has something they want to ask about letters to the editor, or something that was touched upon earlier in the call before we hop off here. Brian, does anyone have their hand up?
Yep. We have Debbie Helper who's had her hand up for a while. Debbie, you're now muted. Maybe she walked away. Jeff Clements has his hand up. Jeff, are you there?
Oh, hi. I think that might have been inadvertent, but I just want to, I guess I'll just say thank you. Keep going. Sorry about that.
We have Michael Huff has had his hand up for a while. Michael, you now
Hey,
unmuted.
thanks so much. It was a letter to the editor question. I think that was covered very well. I'm sorry, I'm new. This is my first phone call. I'm with the newest group maybe in Narberth, Pennsylvania. And do you mind if I ask a question with regard to the Article 5 convention versus the Constitutional Convention?
Sure, go ahead, Michael.
So I guess I was under the initial wrong impression that this was an Article 5 convention effort. That doesn't really change anything for me other than just clarify what's really going on. So, again, my understanding is that you need 2/3 of Congress, the House and the Senate, and then it goes out to the states for 34. You need, 3/4 of the states to, I guess, approve the 28th Amendment. Is that accurate?
Absolutely right so far, yep.
And regardless of whether it was an Article 5 convention or a constitutional convention, or if I'm not, using the terms correctly, please correct me, it would be a 28th Amendment in either.
Yeah, you're cutting up a little bit, Michael, but, thanks for your question, and I'm really excited to, launch the group out there that's forming in Narberth, Pennsylvania. It's a good one. And, I think maybe you bring up a useful clarification point as to, how an amendment is actually passed. All of the amendments in our country, with the exception of the Bill of Rights, come about because 2/3 of both congressional houses pass a piece of legislation calling for a constitutional amendment, and which is then sent out to the states for ratification. And it needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, as you said, which is 38 states. And that's really how the Constitution has historically been amended. So thanks so much for your fantastic question. Well, boy, thank you for your cogent letter to the editor training. And I just want to end the call with the 3 next steps, really, that we can take between now and our call next month to get more involved with the American Promise and to, win the 28th Amendment as quickly as we possibly can. So the first and best thing you can do is start an American Promise Association in your community by filling out and returning the short form I'll be sending each of you by email on Monday. On the form, you can let us know about how you want to get more involved, or you can also just email me. Again, my email is azorc@americanpromise.net. So let me know you'd like a call and on how to get more involved, and we can have a longer conversation over the phone. There will also be an RSVP link for the next call scheduled for Saturday, November 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, and a recording of today's call. All of our past calls are actually on our YouTube channel, which can be a good resource for bringing new group members up to speed, just sort of reviewing past actions that we've taken in previous months, which, still are very useful, relevant things to do, currently and in the future. And lastly, but certainly not least, just stay after the call right now and use the October action sheet, which you should have received yesterday, focused on writing letters to the editor, to really start creating champions in your local media around a 28th Amendment. There will also be an RSVP link for the call scheduled for Saturday the 11th. And I'd like to just end the call with this short quote I found from author and journalist James Bovard, who said, "Democracy must be something more than 2 wolves and a sheep deciding on what to have for dinner." I'll repeat that because I think it's a really fantastic quote. James Bovard says, Democracy must be something more than two wolves and a sheep deciding on what to have for dinner. So thank you all for being on the call, for deciding that our voices will count, and trumpeting the fact that we're citizens, not consumers, and certainly not sheep. Together we'll win and reclaim our democracy. So everyone have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks for joining on the call. Looking forward to furthering this important discussion in the weeks and months to come. Thanks all.